interpret? Can you all see the interpreter on the screen?
No.
No.
We
Now
can now.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so there will be 2 interpreters switching off throughout this conversation. We'll try to keep them spotlighted. You also have control of your own screen, so you can pin them by heading over to hovering over that person and clicking. There should be a dot, 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 and you can click on that and press pin, and that should allow you to keep them on your screen. If you do have any technical trouble, you can send a direct message to me, Lillian, in the chat, or you can also reach out to wewill@rudresources.net. There are also team members on this call with support in front of their name, such as Support Brianna, who can help you out. It would be helpful to us if you could just rename yourself to whatever your name is supposed, the person who's invited, who you're supposed to be, so we know who you are and where you belong. We will get to introductions in just a little bit. And please do mute your microphones and, to the extent possible, avoid multitasking. So I just wanted to say that a little bit. Captions are available. You should see a little caption button on the bottom of your screen. And I think that's it for me for now, and all the housekeeping. And now to our very exciting main event, Department of Planning and Development Commissioner Maurice Cox.
Thank you, Lillian. And thank you all, to all of the individuals on this call and to the group volunteers here tonight. I'm Maurice Cox, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Planning and Development for the City of Chicago. It's really my great pleasure on behalf of Mayor Lightfoot and the City of Chicago to firstly congratulate you on your selection to formally participate in the We Will planning process, and to thank you for your commitment to what we believe will be a once-in-a-lifetime endeavor. We're starting phase 2 of what is a 3-year planning process. We're starting tonight. And your lived experiences, your insights, your willingness to think deeply about the needs of our city will be invaluable to the progress we hope to make over the next months ahead. I know that few, if any of us, have been involved in a community-driven process of planning quite like this one before. And so we ask that you bring your full and authentic selves, that you bring all of your passion for Chicago, and very importantly, your open minds, which will help, we will, to very directly address the needs of people who live, work, and raise family in this city that we love. As you know, phase 1 of the We Will process started last August with small group conversations that produced the plan's 7 pillars and guiding principles of equity and resiliency. Phase 2 will further explore those themes with a particular focus on a historical reckoning component that will consider how Chicagoans can move beyond some of the undesired consequences of many previous planning efforts. So ultimately, We Will's volunteers, you, will help produce the policy frameworks for phase 3 of the process, which will lead to the final plan of action. So the outcomes of your work will resonate. It will resonate citywide for years to come, especially involving government's approach to things like land use and zoning, neighborhood plans, regional plans, innovation and equitable public financing strategies, community-based public decision-making, the annual budgets and capital projects, and their collective impact on all of our lives on a daily basis. So we've got a lot of information to share with you and a lot of work to do. So let's get it underway. I'm thrilled that this journey is starting with you and your participation. And so just thank you. Thank you for your commitment to this work and your commitment to the city of Chicago. Lillian, thank you, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. All right. So you guys are a fantastic group who's so enthusiastic and already finding and using the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. I just want to make sure that we are recording, and one of the things we will do for each and every session is get your permission for that, but we want to do it in a fun way. So I'll say the waiver about recording and what it's for, and then we're going to ask you to use the chat to say that you agree. But besides just saying you agree, we would love to hear about your favorite Chicago hidden gem. So here's the waiver, or here's the information. As a participant in this conversation, you are providing consent to the City of Chicago to use the recording in accordance with its mission. You also understand that the conversation will be a part of a collection of Cortico's Local Voices Network, whose mission is to foster conversations in communities and in the media that improve our understanding of one another. Cortico will collect, retain, and analyze these conversations in keeping with that mission. If you agree, go ahead and type in the chat that you agree and share with us your hidden gem of Chicago. Wow, we see so many coming in. I'd love to read some of them. I see Soul Veg. They're coming in very quickly. Garfield Park Conservatory, Oda Mediterranean, Peaches, lots of food. I think I saw Garfield Park Conservatory, Blackstone Library, Dan Ryan Woods. So we have a great resource in our team here of great Chicago gems. Keep them coming. Calumet Fisheries, yes. Rebuild. Thank you so much for allowing us to do that activity. Please do look through the chat. And we will just take a second to talk some more about Zoom and how we're going to participate in this meeting. So as you guys know, we are using the chat. If you haven't found it already, it's often at the bottom of your window, or you can also press Alt-H. We'll use that to share links or ask a question. You can provide some comments or request troubleshooting help. You can also raise your hand if you're able to, if you have a question throughout the presentation that cannot be answered. This is also found at the bottom of the window. And today we'll have 2 breakout sessions. I'll come back when it's time for breakouts, and you will break out with your pillar research team. With that, you can keep the hidden gems coming, but I will give it over to our mayor's office team of Juan Sebastian and Skylar.
Thank you, Lillian. So just to introduce myself quickly, Juan Sebastian Arias. I work here in the mayor's office in the policy team. My pronouns are he, him, and I want to echo Commissioner Cox and really just share how excited I am. I know the whole team is to be here today to kick off this really important phase of the We Will Chicago citywide planning process. And really, really grateful for all of you joining us in this big undertaking. Even just scrolling through the participant list is so exciting to see, 240 plus people that are coming together for this important effort. So really excited. Skylar and I are going to spend the next 20 minutes going over some grounding slides on the overall planning process, really building on some of the framework that Commissioner Cox started sharing too.
Thanks, Juan Sebastian. And I'm Skylar Larimore. I work on the policy team within the mayor's office with Juan Sebastian. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So you may be asking yourself, why plan? Why are we all taking our time on this Wednesday evening, sweltering night, to think about the citywide plan? So the value of good planning cannot be understated. We Will Chicago is a historic opportunity to engage with community residents, nonprofits, the private sector, government agencies, and others to craft a vision for the future of Chicago. So citywide plans, as Maurice noted, they can be blueprints to create a city that works for everyone and truly addresses systemic inequities so that all individuals and families can thrive. The events of the past year with the global pandemic of COVID-19 and the uprising and reckoning with systemic racism revealed a dire need for a bold strategy and real results for a more equitable and resilient city. So at its best, planning allows residents and stakeholders to think big and collectively create a vision for what we want our city to be. Next slide. So citywide plans can drive short and long-term changes in land use, housing, transportation, natural resources, public health, and so much more. The best plans are used to direct capital projects, policy, and budget investments for years to come, with a built-in structure for accountability around implementation so that plans don't just sit on a shelf. Citywide planning is a common practice in big and small cities across the country and around the world. And the fact that Chicago hasn't had one since the 1960s is an anomaly. Next slide. All right, so this is our macro level timeline of the overall planning process, which Commissioner Cox teed up really well. So the pre-planning process started in 2020 with focus groups with over 250 Chicagoans to shape the overall structure of the We Will plan and the principles, pillars, and themes, which Juan Sebastian will review. So far this year, we've been preparing for this very moment, the launch of the advisory committee and the research teams, which will shape the research and policy reports that will drive the citywide plan. So in 2022, we'll continue to refine the overall plan document, the implementation strategy, and the public-facing final report with public comment for adoption by the Plan Commission and the City Council in 2023. Community and stakeholder engagement and aldermanic engagement will be critically necessary throughout in those blue boxes to ensure that we have a strong plan that's rooted in the vision of Chicagoans, particularly voices of Chicagoans long excluded from planning and policy conversations. Next slide.
So as Skylar and Commissioner Cox earlier mentioned, one of the key outcomes of the pre-planning phase was the development of what you see on the slide here. So that includes the guiding principles, the overarching themes, and the issue-specific pillars for the citywide plan. So we have two principles, and these really are the North Star of the plan, and that's equity and resiliency. We also have 5 themes, which are more a roadmap for the process. These represent the values underlying We Will and how we will be striving to conduct the process itself. And then we have the 7 pillars, and these are the key quality of life drivers that will be addressed through the plan. And I'll share in the next couple of slides, I'll go into a little bit more depth on the themes and the pillars. And later in the meeting, we're gonna have, we will be discussing the principles of equity and resiliency as well. So if you go to the next slide, thank you. Here are the 5 themes of We Will Chicago, which were developed through a series of workshops where community, civic, and city leaders learned from peer cities who had recently conducted citywide plans in order to identify lessons for how Chicago should conduct our own citywide planning process. And so I'll just go through the 5 of them and say a little bit about each. The first is historical reckoning and trust building. And this includes understanding the legacies of past plans, policies, and practices, and how they've harmed communities, often communities of color, while benefiting others. This theme also includes acknowledging the history of systemic racism and of the resultant broken relationships and broken trust between communities and the city. And what this means is that We Will Chicago will be rooted in the history of past plans and actions, and that will include an analysis of previously conducted neighborhood plans, citywide plans, so that we're not starting from scratch, and also recognizing the history of what came before. The second theme is systematic evaluation of equity impacts. And this is one of the ways that we will be operationalizing racial equity throughout We Will Chicago. Our partners at the Chicago Department of Public Health are developing a health and racial equity impact assessment tool, which we will be looking to apply across recommendations that we developed as a part of the plan. And this is really key to changing the operations of government so that we can root our decisions in assessments of impacts by race, by ethnicity, by gender identity, by disability, and more. The third theme is accessible and meaningful community engagement. So we recognize that a citywide plan needs to be co-created in partnership with residents and with community leaders. And so authentic community engagement is absolutely key to that. That includes meeting people where they are, applying creative approaches such as arts-based engagement and more. And we're also looking to advance this by building different ways for people to engage in We Will Chicago, from more formal bodies like the advisory committee or the research teams that you all are a part of, to virtual opportunities, to even neighborhood level events. The fourth theme we have is accountability through shared metrics and transparency. We know that you can't impact what you don't measure. So building a public facing dashboard with high level neighborhood by neighborhood information on the state of Chicago for residents is also going to be key for maintaining accountability to the We Will Chicago plan. And so our intention is to build a plan that external groups and community organizations can hold government accountable around, and also to ensure that we are transparently sharing information related to our progress in implementing the plan and its impacts as well. And then the last overarching theme that we have is around sustained interagency and cross collaboration. And this really speaks to the importance of breaking down silos in government so that we're bringing a whole of government approach to our goals of building a more equitable and resilient Chicago. And as we envision an implementation structure that will make this plan a reality, we will be working to make sure that there are owners across government and across sectors for the recommendations and outcomes that come out through the We Will Chicago planning process. Then if we go to the next slide, here are the 7 pillars that are the critical quality of life areas that we'll be focusing on. And you should all be familiar with these, since this is how we conducted the open application process. So I won't read them all out loud right now, but these include everything from arts and culture to housing and neighborhoods to transportation and infrastructure.
So this slide provides an overview of the many different stakeholders who will engage in this current phase of the plan. So at the top, we have the advisory committee of 33 individuals and organizations selected through the open application process this spring. This group will be thought partners on the full breadth of the citywide plan, looking across pillars for what might be missing and ensuring that we're living our principles and themes along the way. Next, we have 1 pillar research team for each of the major topics of the citywide plan, and each team consists of individuals and organizations, again, selected through the same open application process, as well as city and sister agency staff and an artist organizer pair. Each team will have 2 co-chairs, 1 city and 1 non-city member, who will assist with report outs to groups like the advisory committee and the Interagency Committee and advise on meeting agendas. Each team will be supported by a number of consultants supporting research, facilitation, documentation, and community engagement, which are detailed on the next slide. So on the project management front, all the way on the left-hand side, DPD is keeping the engine of the plan, the Department of Planning and Development is keeping the engine of the plan running alongside partners in the mayor's office and DCAS, who will make up the core of the We Will Chicago administrative team, along with the consultants. The Interagency Committee is a group that we're convening quarterly with departments and agencies from throughout the city to keep them updated on the plan as it progresses. A facilitation consultant team is on board to scope out and facilitate future meetings to ensure that we are on track with our deliverables and making space for tough conversations and incorporating the themes and principles throughout our work. A research consultant team in the next box is assisting with report writing and extra research needs that will come up in the course of discussing past plans and future recommendations. The team also includes documenters to help distill insights and ensure that we're updating the public along the way as we're building the plan together. And lastly, in the purple box, the artist organizer team. This is through our partnership with DCAS and Honey Pot Performance. We're collaborating with 7 artist organizer pairs who are conducting artistic, out-of-the-box strategies for community engagement to enliven and generate ideas around each of the pillars of the plan. These artist organizers are members of each of the research teams through the wrap of their current phase in September, and they will contribute insights from their neighborhood-based engagements, as well as create opportunities for you all to engage with them and other Chicagoans in person and virtually at events as well. Next slide.
So picking up on that last thread around public engagement, as I mentioned earlier, accessible, meaningful engagement is one of our overarching themes that we'll be applying across We Will Chicago. So this slide notes some of the channels through which we will be doing some of that community engagement. And so the first circle are the artist and organizer teams, which Skylar just talked about. And again, those are 7 teams that will be working and are currently working in geographic hubs throughout the city, as well as 1 mobile artist team. The next circle over shows that we will also be having community engagement events led and facilitated by 25 community partners, including all of which were invited to this call or should be on the call too, who receive funds to both participate in the research teams or the advisory committee, as well as to conduct engagement sessions themselves. The next circle over, our partners at Metropolitan Planning Council are also developing a meeting in a box toolkit that can then be used by any resident or organization in Chicago to host conversations and gather additional input across the city. And last, we also have our virtual forums, both website and through online surveys that will be accessible throughout, that are currently accessible and will remain accessible throughout the process at wewillchicago.com. If we go to the next slide, thank you. And before I jump into some of the content here, I do just want to share a note that as you all know, we went through this open application process to identify community partners and volunteers. And that process itself included review by over 70 volunteer reviewers. And then those aggregate scores were reviewed by a selection committee to make to identify final membership for the teams. And that selection committee included 2 of the advisory committee co-chairs, as well as 2 staff from the Department of Planning and Development and 2 staff from the mayor's office. So the outcome of that open application process and selection process for the teams is how we ended up with all of you here today. And this map gives you a sense of some of the representation from across the city. So this map shows the reach of some of our community engagement activities. This includes the 25 community partners, as well as the artist organizer teams, who are going to be critical linkages to neighborhoods across the city as we move throughout the process. And just as a reminder, we'll also have those mobile artist teams that will be fostering additional engagement for communities that are less represented on this map, and doing so by attending large-scale community events, festivals, gatherings, and the like. On the next slide, we similarly have a map that shows where all of the volunteers, again, all of you on this call, or a portion of you on this call, where you all are coming from. And again, the final membership reflects the selection committee's efforts to balance a number of things, not just an applicant's scores in the application process, but also geographic representation, diversity of perspectives, racial and ethnic identity, gender identity, and disability status. And we also looked at diversity and personal interest in this work and also professional and lived experiences as well. And so you can see at a high level the outcomes or how the volunteer breakdown looks. I will also just note that we have been reflecting also on where we currently have some gaps and are going to be making sure to take proactive steps to make sure that we're including all voices throughout this process as best as we can. Now on this slide, I know it's too small to really read, but we just want to emphasize that we're not starting from a blank slate. We know there have been many neighborhood and citywide plans conducted in the last several decades, and each research team will begin by reviewing those past plans to elevate important insights and learnings. And again, this map just gives you a bit of a snapshot. We have already, in the pre-planning phase, we already inventoried a number of past plans that actually amounted to over 300 plans that were conducted in the city over the last 25 years. So that's a lot to build off of, as you can imagine. On the next slide here, we just want to note that we're often asked how this plan, how We Will Chicago will relate to other initiatives or priorities across the city that are already underway. And you can guess that there are a lot, especially that relate across all of the 7 pillars and our 2 guiding principles. And just to call out a few, there are some on the slide, but there are plenty more, likely more that are not on here. To just call out a few, there is the Year of Healing initiative that's being led through the Office of Equity Racial Justice. There's Healthy Chicago 2025, which is Chicago's 5-year community health improvement plan that focuses on racial and health equity and reducing the Black-white life expectancy gap, and many more, from the strategic plan recently released by the Department of Transportation to our food equity agenda to equitable transit-oriented development. So ensuring that we're building on and coordinating across these initiatives is also why we have the Interagency Committee established that Skylar mentioned earlier. And it's also why we're very intentional in making sure that representatives from across city departments and sister agencies are involved in the research teams and across the entire process.
The next slide is a double click on the timeline for this current phase that we are embarking on together. So we've broken up this current phase into 3 steps that you see in the light gray at the top. So the first is setting the stage or establishing guiding questions. The second is developing a policy toolkit. The third is setting a policy framework or the recommendations in each of the pillars for the plan. So to drive that work, research teams will start meeting monthly and the advisory committees will start meeting monthly after August. The connection across the teams and committees is something that we're thinking a lot about. We want to create opportunities for different teams and committees to learn about and inform each other's work, and also to review draft recommendations as they're coming out. As one example, the research teams will do report outs with the advisory committee and interagency committee along the way this year. The interagency committee will meet quarterly for updates and alignment and will review and provide feedback on all of your deliverables throughout this phase. And the current phase of community engagement with the artist organizers and community partners will stretch through September and December respectively, with additional outreach needs to be determined for 2022. Next slide. So this gives you a sense of, if you're a research team member, what to expect in the months to come. All this content will be sent out after the fact as well again, but meetings 1 through 3, to give you a high level overview. Again, it's setting the stage, establishing the guiding questions that each team will explore throughout this process, reviewing past plans and grounding in the practice of historical reckoning, and understanding what we mean by equity and sustainability within each of the pillar topics. Meetings 4 through 6 will focus on developing a policy toolkit or identifying objectives and initial policy recommendations for each pillar. This includes looking at best practices from other cities and even within Chicago, defining goals for our city as well, and incorporating the feedback from the artist organizer teams and community partners that will start and continue to do their engagement during this period. And lastly, meetings 7 through 9 on our final stretch will be developing the final policy framework, thinking about implementation and establishing some metrics for accountability, as well as identifying potential partners. We'll also take a step back and review everything in the plan to make sure that we're addressing any outstanding gaps in the year ahead in 2022. So to wrap up the next slide, we are super excited to have an opportunity for all of you to get to know each other. So even more important than all of these slides about process is getting to know the people, each other who will be involved in the plan and what you hope to bring to this critical work, why you're interested and invested in it. And as Juan Sebastian and Commissioner Cox mentioned, we just want to echo so much gratitude to all of you for taking your time to be here with us tonight for this truly historic moment. It sometimes feels less historic because we're not all in one grand room with each other, feeling the energy, making connections over a cup of tea. But alas, we're here tonight. We're here in this moment to make history with each other. So super excited to dive in. And with that, we'll kick it into our breakout rooms.
All right. So in the spirit of what Skylar just mentioned, this is a big effort. This is our first time together. If we were doing this in person, we'd all be in a very large gym and filing out. So we appreciate your patience and cooperation as we try and get all 200 of you where you need to go. So we are going to hit the button to open the breakout rooms, and hopefully many of you will already go to your assigned breakout rooms. Some of you may not be assigned because we didn't know that you were coming or have your email address matched correctly. So we will be working to put you into your correct room too. Those are pillar by your pillar. So I see that some rooms are open and people are moving. You may have to click a button that says join.
My name is Emilia Chico. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I am the research lead for lifelong education. I'm a light brown-skinned Latinx genderqueer person wearing a white shirt, a green and yellow huichol necklace, gray framed glasses, with my blurred living room in the background. The current slide reads historical reckoning and past planning efforts, and we'll stay on this slide for a moment. I'm coming to you from the Hyde Park community, although I am not native to Hyde Park. I am native to South Chicago and the East Side, two communities that have deep historical ties to Chicago's history, yet we are often forgotten. So I want to give a shout out to my East Side folks. If we were face to face, we'd give a little love. Yeah, woo, right? So what's good, family? Welcome. Before we begin this section, it's important for me to name that we are all sitting on, residing on, building upon, dreaming upon indigenous land, native land, ancestral land that is marked with a history of genocide, cultural erasure, forced displacement, intentional exclusion, all that has left a legacy of trauma and injustice against Native people. Today, we acknowledge the Council of the Three Fires, comprised of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, as well as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sauk, Fox, Kickapoo, and Illinois nations. These tribes had thriving trade networks in the Great Lakes area prior to European contact. Offering this land acknowledgement is directly tied to the theme of historical reckoning, which lays a meaningful foundation to this work. Reckoning is necessary, reckoning is urgent, and make no mistake, it is about disrupting systems of oppression. So as we begin to dream our big dreams for this city of ours, as we design a plan woven together with equity, by equity, resilience, and healing, I encourage each of us to commit to the historical reckoning aspect of this work with authenticity, vulnerability, and intentionality. So that brings us to our framework. So we could change the slide. This slide reads at the top, historical reckoning, and I will go through each bullet point. First, we must reflect on our past, acknowledge the value in truth-telling, make space for personal stories, and understand the impacted the unintended consequences of various policies and practices enacted throughout our collective history. Policies and practices that have harmed many of us. We must pay attention to how community members are making sense of this reckoning. I'll tell you, for me, I make sense of it as a third-generation Southeast Side Chicagoan. I have love for Chicago deep in my soul, yet I'm often reminded that me and my people, my elders, my ancestors have been poisoned and discarded for decades. I have reckoned with this traumatic past to relocate the love and commitment I have to transforming this city of ours. The question I ask of all of us is, how are you making sense of this reckoning work? And what can we all learn from our collective history? Next bullet. We must also reclaim our present and connect with community members who are engaging in this reckoning work right now. It's happening across the city. Those who are creative and thoughtful about healing spaces for their elders, their families, their children, educators, like the hundreds of truth, racial healing, and transformation circles that have taken place and continue to take place across the city. So we must ask, in what ways is your work connected to this moment of healing and transformation? Next bullet, we must reimagine our future, right? Reimagine it together so that we can dream of a future that is committed to these principles, a future that centers the lived experiences of all Chicagoans, especially those of us who have been historically excluded. Asking our community members, what do you want this city to look like? The work we are engaged in will be meaningful because we are committed to revisiting the past. And with that, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Maurice, who's going to walk us through some collective history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Can we all just acknowledge that that is one tough act to follow? But I will do my best here. I am Maurice Schultz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a facilitation lead for the project. And as a part of this truth telling, we wanted to spend some time today looking back at Chicago's history of planning. Why is this important? While planning in Chicago is and should be celebrated, we also have to revisit the past to examine what we can all do better this time around. In the limited time that I have today, we're not trying to tell the whole history of Chicago and the whole history of planning around the city. But in phase one, we did do an inventory of plans from the last 25 years. And as Juan Sebastian had mentioned, it includes more than 300 plans and growing. So our hope is that running through some of Chicago's past planning efforts can highlight the significance of planning and its resulting policies. And by reviewing the intent and impact of these plans, we bring a historical reckoning framework to this process. This allows us to begin the conversation on how we can move forward to change course, center equity and resiliency in everything we do in this project, and collectively envision a bright and just future for Chicago. So I will start by revisiting our origins of planning, which was the 1909 Plan of Chicago. Also, as many of you probably know, it is referred to as the Burnham Plan, that sought to beautify Chicago and improve the efficiency of commerce at that time. Projects such as the widening of Chicago's streets and boulevards took shape over the next few decades after the plan was adopted. New streets were introduced, such as Wacker Drive along the Chicago River. And I think one of the most noticeable portions of the plan to come to fruition is the city's 24 miles of lakefront out of its 25 miles of lakefront that serve as public parkland. Until the mid-50s, downtown Chicago experienced a decline in office development and a flight of whites to the suburbs. As a result, the focus of the early to mid-50s was on rebuilding downtown. This included the construction of a major highway network, which displaced 6,000 families and 2,200 single people in the late 40s to mid 50s. Urban renewal on the south side that cleared 101 acres, which uprooted 4,600 families and 1,600 single people to make way for modernist middle-class housing. Certain public housing developments at this time were also selected for slum clearance, specifically between 1955 and 1956. There was also widespread removal of 8,000 residents, predominantly immigrant communities, on the near west side for the UIC Harrison Halstead campus. And while each of these communities were directly impacted by these clearances and the redevelopment that followed, so were residents from adjacent neighborhoods. So I'd like to just call out to Christina Harris, who's the director of the Metropolitan Planning Council, who led the pre-planning work for We Will. Christina, could you share an example of how this urban renewal era continues to impact planning today?
Sure. I think planning now is often really focused on fixing what I think were some of the consequences that stemmed from this urban renewal period, where road networks were built that resulted in community separation. There are now multiple projects to cap highways, to reconnect neighborhoods. The removal and relocation of communities resulted in financial and social losses, which really drained community wealth in areas that now needs to be rebuilt and has been being rebuilt for many, many years. The result was distrust amongst communities and planners as the process became associated a lot with displacement, as much of the planning was top down at the time. So this acknowledgement of what has occurred and trying to then rectify it by increasing the amount of involvement that stakeholders and residents can have in the planning process, I think is a part of an outgrowth of what was happening at this time with a lot of the top-down decisions that were being made.
Thank you so much, Christina. I appreciate your thoughts. So we're going to move into kind of the late 50s and early 60s, when there was a continuation of a shift to development and planning efforts towards growth in the central area, Chicago. So downtown redevelopment planning was driven by the mayor and private actors at this time. And as this happened, a growth coalition was formed, which included developers and other private sector actors who were much more focused on the downtown business core than development in neighborhoods. This private influence led to political deal making. And because downtown growth was prioritized, this imbalance led to a contentious dynamic between the city, residents, and communities. And as floor area ratios, or FARs, and a planned unit development process helped these downtown focus initiatives, pocket clearances in communities were underway to make room downtown for middle-class families. And in 1958, the new Department of City Planning launched the Central Area Chicago Planning Initiative, which envisioned 50,000 dwelling units close to downtown by transforming old railroad yards into mixed-use office and residential development and using air rights to build up along the Chicago River. All in all, the plan served to focus development within the compact loop, and as a result, neighborhood planning felt downright neglected. In addition to the focus on development, community resentment grew over larger political and social forces at play. In the early 60s, Mayor Daley launched a comprehensive planning effort for the city to help guide development and to access federal dollars. While this comprehensive plan of Chicago was the first of its kind to look at the city comprehensively and to create sub-area plans for different areas, there were a lot of drawbacks to the process. And the end result is that we as a city need to be aware of as we enter our first citywide plan since Daley's initiative. First, Daley wanted the plan to be large scale like Burnham's, but as a result, it contained way too many broad guidelines, didn't have enough teeth, and therefore was never fully translated to policies. And while some of its policies were aimed at managing racial integration, a lot of the focus of the plan was combating white flight. The planning process also lacked significant community engagement. And so as a result, it wasn't very popular and was ultimately never approved by City Council. So we had a comprehensive plan created in the 60s, primarily to access federal funding for projects, but federal dollars dried up in the 70s, which shifted planning into regulatory mode, where there was more of a focus on single parcel projects, such as Lake Point Tower. This era of planning introduced some positive efforts, including the 1972 Lakefront Plan of Chicago, which protected the lakefront from private development and scaled back planning for a massive road, as well as the 1974 River Edge Plan, which managed the river as a public space in the downtown. In the 70s, you saw a lot of community-based frustration resulting in a cry for focusing on neighborhoods rather than just the downtown. Community pushback from neighborhood groups resulted in the canceling of the Crosstown Expressway, and independent community development organizations took hold and started forming networks across the city. While they ultimately found inroads to city politics and planning through Harold Washington's election and mayoral position, and truly started shifting planning to a more bottom-up focus. But there was still that long entrenched private sector's power over city politics that continued the focus on an investment in downtown development. The early 80s saw a short-lived shift to economic equity planning under the Washington administration. In 1983, the Chicago Central Area Plan was drafted. This plan oriented towards growth surrounding the downtown and leveraged business interests using the World's Fair, which is to be held in Chicago, as a catalyst. But neighborhood organizations opposed this plan and argued that the jobs would be temporary, the fair would do little for communities, and costs and risks were just too high. As a result, the Washington administration ultimately scrapped the plan and started focusing city planning efforts well beyond the downtown area. A year after the Central Area Plan was scrapped, the administration launched the Chicago Works Together Plan, which was inclusive for Chicago as a whole. The plan focused on outcomes and process and advocated for 5 main goals: to increase job opportunities, to promote balanced growth, to assist neighborhood development, pursue greater public participation and openness in planning, and extract more money from state and federal government. Implementation of the plan brought about community development block grant reforms, which shifted program oversight from planning to economic development. The city worked with community groups to create standards of needs to channel money to underfunded communities. The administration also launched the first tax increment financing, or TIF district, which is a funding tool used to promote public and private investments. This first TIF was located in the theater district and looked into how linkage fees, which required developers to dedicate land or pay fees, could be used to benefit lower income neighborhoods, essentially changing the tune and leveraging downtown development for neighborhood development. Unfortunately, opposition from developers, city officials, and ultimately the state of Illinois limited the passage of any formal regulation regarding these linkage fees. So now I would like to turn the mic over to Leslie Roth, who's principal at Lamar Johnson Collaborative and has been involved in this project from the beginning. Leslie, as the research lead for the Environment, Climate, and Energy pillar, how does this era inform the work of your pillar?
So a lot of this area, this time in Chicago's history was punctuated by beautification efforts in landscape and in the environment of Chicago. So the landscape ordinance was passed in 1991 and updated again in 1999. This era also laid the groundwork for the on-street bike path system that we have, and the first couple 100 miles were created. There was also the planted median program that happened in the early 90s. And finally, one of those kind of beautification efforts that you see is a tree planting campaign that started in 1989 and has resulted in over 500,000 new trees planted, which enhances the urban tree canopy and helps make our neighborhoods more beautiful.
Thank you so much, Leslie. So headed into the late 90s to the 2000s, we're almost there, hang with me. They had some losses and wins in terms of planning, but there have been more middle range plans that show us that Chicago can in fact plan effectively. These include neighborhood focused efforts that combined a focus on community engagement with a strong and structured planning process. The focus was on gaining the trust of community groups to participate in meetings that had clear steps and outlined goals. These efforts were mainly led by community and civic groups, and as a result, there were mixed outcomes for a range of reasons, but including the daily challenges of on-the-ground implementation among partners and a lack of connection back to city-level plans and zoning guidelines. From 2001 to 2004, the city underwent a comprehensive rewrite of zoning code and ordinances, including density bonuses and revisions to plan development process. Inclusionary zoning to require affordable housing in all large new developments and a thorough remap weren't fully achieved, but what made this project so effective was a carefully structured approach and community education effort around the rezoning. So now I would like to pass the mic to Kate Mcmahon, who's Director of the Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion in the Chicago Department of Public Health. Kate, I would love to hear about your current thinking on health and all policies and the health and race equity impact assessments and how those intersect with our work and what we're doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the theme of this being historical reckoning, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight Chicago's life expectancy gap by race as sort of the ultimate outcome of past planning efforts. So we know that between certain communities, there's a gap in life expectancy by up to 17 years, and that is unjust, unacceptable, and preventable. And what the health department has heard through our Healthy Chicago community planning efforts is that the city really needs to implement a health equity in all policies approach to make sure that government works with community to shape our social, our economic, our physical environments in ways that promote health and race equity. And that this really requires really authentic engagement of community members to incorporate lived experience, preferences, and power into policy planning and decision-making processes. And community engaged tools like health and race equity impact assessment, as Juan Sebastian mentioned in his preview, can really help by assessing the potential benefits and burdens of proposed policy making and to really make recommendations to promote health and race equity. And we'll talk more about this in upcoming pillar and research team meetings and really share some tools so that you can incorporate these practices within your research teams and then ultimately the policy frameworks that we'll be developing as part of citywide planning.
Thank you, Kate, for giving us an overview on that. And so building on the early 2000s, the last decade has seen a more distributed model of planning for neighborhoods and networks, and one in which we will be building on. LIST's New Communities program has produced more than 25 quality of life plans led by community organizations. Neighborhood chambers, SSAs, and community groups have similarly embarked on community-led plans that are not always adopted through a formal city process. CHA's plan for transformation has been implemented and involved with a focus on demolition, redevelopment, and the creation of mixed income communities. The Department of Housing has also released the country's first racial impact assessment on a qualified allocation plan. The last decade has also brought city mobility plans, such as the pedestrian plan, streets for cycling, complete streets design guidelines, and Vision Zero, with increasing community engagement and participation from advocates. And Invest Southwest continues to commit city resources to the south and west sides of Chicago with unprecedented community engagement and new processes for development and redevelopment. The Chicago Department of Public Health has released Healthy Chicago 2.0 and Healthy Chicago 2025 as part of an overall health and all policies approach, and is developing a health and racial equity impact assessment, as Kate had mentioned, for city departments, community groups in this process. And finally, the city has released its ETOD policy plan, and Elevated Chicago is leading a new approach to community-led planning and equitable TOD. So I know that was a whirlwind and there was so much I couldn't cover, or we would be here until the early morning. So I'd like to end this section with the question: with all of this and taking all of this in, how do we celebrate Chicago's planning history and legacy while also acknowledging its harm? And I don't think we have all the answers because this is the beginning of a conversation. But what I do know is that this process will look different, it will feel different, and that's why we're all here today. This is the work we're here to do, and I think we're all very excited to be a part of that. One exciting evolution within planning and the city is the focus on equity. And it is that reason that I am so pleased to introduce Candice Moore, the city's Chief Equity Officer. Candice, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to be with everyone. My name is Candice Moore. I serve as the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Chicago. And I want to take a few minutes of our times to talk about definitions and to ground us in some shared principles and some shared definitions as we embark on this work. I have this friend who she's a Q fellow, so another few Q shout outs, but she had this great shirt one day that said words mean things. And it's so true. And I often say it, that it's so important when we start our work for us to get clear and build a shared foundation of what we mean when we say certain words. And so I want to walk us through a few definitions and share some of the definitions that I will ask us to hold in this work. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is the only way to define the work and that we can't add in or build from, but we will ground ourselves collectively around these definitions. So the first is healing. And why I want to name healing is because in this moment, as we talk about historical reckoning, as we think about everything that's going on in our world right now, the word healing comes up repeatedly. And this is a definition that comes from work out of the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation work. Healing recognizes the need to acknowledge and tell the truth about past wrongs created by individual and systemic racism and address the present consequences. Before transforming systems and structures, we must first transform ourselves. To heal is to restore to wholeness, to repair damage, and to set right. The next definition I want to share with everyone is resiliency. So resiliency is a word that has come up in a number of the work. I know that at one point the city had a resiliency plan, and there's been a lot of work both locally and nationally thinking about what does it mean to be a resilient city. So this comes from the definition that was defined as part of Resilient Chicago 2019, and it reads, resiliency is the ability of individuals, institutions, businesses, and systems within the community to survive, adapt, and grow despite the chronic stresses or acute shocks it experiences. A truly resilient city is not only expected to perform well in good times, but also recover expediently after challenges. The next definition I want to share is one in which I've actually spent quite a lot of time building with many members of our community, and that is equity. It is a word that is used quite often right now. It is a word in which in many ways, a lot of the work has been thinking about equity. And so often I find that when we say it, we're not quite clear on what we're talking about. And so it was important for me as Chief Equity Officer to not just pull a definition from some other space or city, et cetera, but for us to actually build this definition together. And so me and my team were privileged to move through an initiative called Together We Heal. We were so thankful and grateful to be supported and do this in partnership with the work of We Will Chicago. And we were able to put out a draft, in which we will be finalizing soon, of an equity statement of principles. And it is the product of the feedback and the labor and the love that people poured into both that initiative to think about healing, but ultimately to leave behind a grounding definition, not only for this work, but for the city of Chicago as we continue to build our work. And so the definition I will share is both a short one and I will go into some of the longer versions. But the first is the short definition of equity is equity is both an outcome and a process that results in fair and just access to opportunity and resources that provide everyone the ability to thrive. But what's important is that we dig into this a little bit more. And so as an outcome, equity results in fair and just access to opportunity and resources that provide everyone the ability to thrive. Acknowledging the present and historical inequality that persists in our society, equity is a future state we strive to create where identity and social status no longer predestine life outcomes. We also wanted to dig into equity as a process. As a process, equity requires a new way of doing business, one that first prioritizes access and opportunities for groups who have the greatest need. Second, methodically evaluates benefits and burdens produced by seemingly neutral systems and practices. And third, engages those most impacted by the problems we seek to address as experts in their own experiences, strategists in co-creating solutions, and evaluators of success. Also, as part of the equity statement of principles, we thought it was important to get clear about what we mean and what we mean differently when we are talking about racial equity specifically. So racial equity focuses on the social construction of race and how it has been used historically and presently to unjustly distribute opportunity and resources based upon a person's skin color, heritage, ethnicity, and/or national origin. Advancing racial equity requires an analysis of systemic racism, inclusive of the ways harm is created at the individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural levels. It also requires a commitment to dismantling systems that perpetuate racialized outcomes and rebuild systems that produce systemic inclusion. It was important to us in this work to make sure that we really got into and named racial equity and how race has been used both historically and how we must think about our responsibility to build forward. In addition to the definition of equity in the breakdown, we also provided, we also worked together to create what we call guiding principles. And so I want to share some of those guiding principles, which are ways that folks lifted up of how do we get here? If equity is a future state, what is it going to take to get there? So the first is build a culture of inclusion and diversity. We must unlearn narratives and practices that promote exclusion, division, and oppression. Instead, we must nurture narratives and practices that embrace belonging, mutuality, and unity. We must build the capacity to execute in ways that maximize the wealth of talent and the collective genius our city has to offer. We must also deepen our spectrum of engagement. This requires us to shift power at decision-making tables and learn how to co-create solutions with those most impacted by the problem. We must also routinize equity impact analysis in our process and our practice. This requires us to interrogate systems that seem neutral and see if they have unintended impacts, and for us to work to mitigate harmful outputs. We must ensure that the benefits and the burdens of the decisions we make flow in a fair and just manner. We must invest in our healing. This requires us to acknowledge harms that have been created intentionally and unintentionally, whether those be by individuals, events, or systems. We must commit to repairing harm where we have agency and authority to create impact. We must learn from our past mistakes and adopt restorative practices and mindsets into our strategies and work environments. And last, and certainly not least, we must be accountable for equitable progress. We must use data and metrics to have honest and transparent conversations about the impact of our work. This is the definitions and the principles that I offer to us as we start off this work. Let it ground us, let us be intentional about it. And today, and what better time than to start right now? So as we move forward, I want you to ask this question. In all that you have heard and in all that you are processing about the definition of equity, the definition of resiliency, the definition of healing, the guiding principles that we charge ourselves collectively to hold, what is one commitment that you can make to live out the equity statement of principles? Regardless of whatever committee or working group or portion of this plan that you sit at, we all have a fundamental responsibility to do this equity work. I often joke, equity is not just the job of the chief equity officer. Don't come here looking for me to sprinkle any equity on it. Equity is all of our collective jobs, but my job is to support us in building it. And so in that support, I charge us to think of what is one commitment that you can make to live out the equity statement of principles in this work. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to building with you, and I look forward to hearing how we are going to build equity throughout this plan.
With that, we'll head to breakouts 2. It'll be the same process. Hopefully you'll be able to see something pop up that says join. Click on it and we'll see you in a minute. I see those participant numbers coming back. So hopefully most people have joined us. We're pretty close to where we were when we left. In closing, I know it was a lot of information to take in today. Appreciate you all sticking around, participating enthusiastically, and kicking this off in a really wonderful way. I hope you are enthusiastic to come back because we're meeting again for meeting number 2 on the week of August 9th. In the meantime, I want to flag you to a couple of items that'll be coming your way. We'll start sending follow-up emails. In it, please do look for a survey to fill out to let us know what's going well, what can be improved, how we're doing. We do want to look at that and understand it. Look for reminder emails as well as the rest of the calendar invites with the Zoom information from wewill@rudresources.net. That is also the email address where you can address questions. Let us know in advance at that email if you cannot make the meeting so we can be flagged and know that we should send you some follow-up materials and help your facilitators plan for the meeting. We do hope in future meetings to build in some time for you to fellowship and ask each other questions and further connect and dive deeper than our facilitated conversations. So we invite you to join the conversation early or stay up to 30 minutes late just to chat informally. For the next meeting number 2, it will be a discussion of norms in your pillar groups at your regular meeting time. And we encourage you to, if you haven't already, spend some time on the We Will Chicago website. It's got some great information. If you're not registered, there's an opportunity to sign up for updates on the many other parts of We Will and community engagement that's going on. today we won't keep you any longer. We did pretty good with closing on time. And unless my colleagues have something they need to chime in with, we will let you log off. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody.